I had been looking forward to our anniversary for weeks. It wasn't just another date on the calendar. It was a moment I had been dreaming of for months. My husband, David, had promised me a special surprise, something that would make this anniversary unforgettable. After all, we had been married for over 30 years, and I always thought we had a bond that was unbreakable. We'd weathered storms together, raised our children, and shared countless memories. But now, at 55, I had begun to feel the weight of time. Our connection had been slipping. There were little things I noticed, like how we didn't talk as much as we used to, or how I felt more like a housemate than a wife. Despite that, I held on to the hope that maybe this anniversary would remind me of what we once had. The night before the big day, I was in our kitchen preparing a meal. I hadn't expected anything extravagant, but a simple gesture, a thoughtful gift was what I imagined. David was quiet, distant, more absorbed in his phone than usual. But it didn't raise any suspicion at first. He'd always been busy with work, and I understood. When he finally spoke, it was about our plans for the next day. He mentioned something about a surprise he had been planning for weeks. I smiled, feeling my heart flutter, not because of what he said, but because of the excitement that built up in me. After so many years, I longed for that feeling again, the rush of anticipation, the thrill of something special. That night, however, as I was picking up his things from the living room, I came across a piece of paper tucked under a magazine. At first, it looked like a list of tasks or reminders, but as I read further, I saw the words, "Reservation for Twos," and "Private Dinner," written in bold letters. I immediately thought he had planned a romantic dinner, maybe even a getaway, but something felt off. There was a name I didn't recognize, Helen, followed by a phone number. My heart sank. I tried to brush it off, thinking it was just a coincidence, but the nagging feeling wouldn't leave me. My mind raced, imagining what the connection might be. I checked the phone number, but it wasn't familiar. David had never mentioned anyone named Helen before, and something about the situation didn't sit right with me. Curiosity got the better of me. I couldn't help myself. I decided to do a little digging, something I would never normally do. I picked up his phone, unlocked it, and scrolled through his messages. There, I found an entire conversation, one that made my stomach churn. It was a thread between David and this woman, Helen, from earlier in the week. The messages were filled with laughter, shared inside jokes, and plans for a meeting after our anniversary dinner. The texts were casual, but they were also flirtatious. My heart pounded in my chest as I read on, the words feeling like punches. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow night, David," one message read. "I'll wear that red dress you like," said another. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. The surprise he had promised me wasn't for me at all. He had been planning an anniversary celebration with someone else. It wasn't just a slip-up or a misunderstanding, it was betrayal. The man I had spent decades with, the man I thought I knew so well, had been lying to me. And now, he was planning to spend our special night with another woman. The more I thought about it, the more my anger grew. How could he do this to me, to us? I had given him everything, my love, my devotion, my years of sacrifice. And this was how he repaid me? The rage inside me bubbled up, but so did something else, an intense desire to make him understand the gravity of what he was doing. I didn't want to confront him right away. No, I wanted him to feel the sting of his actions without realizing I knew the truth. I needed to teach him a lesson, one that would leave a mark, something he would never forget. If he thought he could deceive me like this and get away with it, he was wrong. I decided to turn his own surprise into something that would open his eyes to the consequences of his betrayal. But I needed to plan. I wasn't going to let him see me coming. This wasn't going to be an angry outburst or a tearful confrontation. It was going to be a lesson in respect, and I would make sure he understood it well. For the first time in a long while, I felt in control. The next day, I pretended like everything was normal. I acted as if I was still excited for the surprise he promised me, as if nothing had changed. I made breakfast, talked about the weather, and smiled whenever he glanced my way. I could see that he was excited, practically bubbling with anticipation, completely unaware of what I had discovered. I couldn't help but feel a little smug about how easily I was fooling him, but my mind was working overtime, planning how to handle everything. I knew I couldn't let him off easy, but I needed to be smart about this. Around noon, I made a call to a few close friends of mine, friends I hadn't spoken to in a while. I needed their help. I hadn't planned on involving anyone else, but I realized this was bigger than just me. I had to make David face the consequences in a way that would hit him where it hurt the most. I arranged to meet up with them that afternoon, telling them it was a girls' day out, but really it was part of my plan to turn the tables. By the time David came home that evening, I had everything in motion. The house was set up as though nothing was wrong, with a quiet atmosphere that kept him guessing. I could feel his eyes on me as I busied myself with a few last-minute details, the surprise hanging in the air between us. He was itching to know what was going to happen, thinking he was the one in control. He mentioned how excited he was for tonight, how he couldn't wait for me to see the surprise he had planned. But deep down, I knew that the real surprise was going to be the look on his face when everything unraveled. I had already planned my escape for the evening. While David continued to prepare for the so-called romantic dinner, I took a moment to gather my thoughts. I would be leaving for a little while, slipping away into a night that was entirely mine, one where I wasn't a mere spectator to his lies. I made sure to tell him that I was meeting some friends for dinner instead of staying home. I could see the flash of confusion in his eyes when I said it. David tried to hide his disappointment, but it was obvious. He didn't expect me to turn the tables so quickly. The fact that I had not only discovered his betrayal but was now willing to leave for the evening without a second thought seemed to catch him off guard. But I didn't let it show. I smiled sweetly, kissed him on the cheek, and told him to enjoy the night. The look on his face, confusion mixed with guilt, was everything I had hoped for. As I walked out the door, I felt a rush of empowerment. For once, I wasn't the one left waiting. I wasn't the one left in the dark, wondering what would happen next. Tonight, I was in control. I spent the evening at my friend Claire's house, sipping wine and chatting about everything except David. It felt good to be out, away from the house, away from him. My friends noticed my unusual calmness, but they didn't question me. They knew better than to ask too many details when I was clearly working through something on my own. But inside, I wasn't at ease. I was planning, waiting for the right moment to strike. The plan was simple, but it required precision. I had to wait for David to think he was in the clear, only for him to be blindsided by the truth. The night dragged on, and I watched the clock as it ticked closer to the time I knew David would be getting ready to leave for his dinner. By this point, he would likely be dressing up, all excited about his night with Helen, oblivious to the storm that was brewing just a few steps away. I could feel a mixture of anger and sadness, but it wasn't enough to stop me. If anything, it gave me the strength to go through with what I had planned. It wasn't just about punishing him. It was about reclaiming my sense of self and showing him just how little he truly understood the value of our relationship. Just before I left Claire's house, I received a text from David. He sounded thrilled. He told me that he was on his way to pick up Helen and they were about to head to the restaurant. He even mentioned how he was looking forward to making the evening unforgettable for her. The text stung, but I quickly dismissed it. This was just the beginning. I excused myself from the group and headed back home, my heart racing as I approached the front door. I made sure to stay quiet as I entered the house, not wanting to alert him. The house was dimly lit, and the faint sound of classical music filled the air. David's idea of setting the mood. He had gone all out thinking I would be impressed, but there was nothing impressive about it. As I walked through the house, I noticed all the little details he had put into place, completely unaware that I had already seen through his charade. I carefully made my way to the living room where I knew he would be. He was standing in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie. He looked up when he saw me, his face lighting up. "Hey, you look beautiful tonight," he said, his tone almost too cheery, too rehearsed. I didn't respond at first, just stood there, looking at him. I could see the nervous energy in his eyes as he tried to hide his guilt. He thought I was still none the wiser. But I wasn't fooled. Not anymore. "You've really gone all out, haven't you?" I finally said, my voice steady but filled with a quiet rage. David looked confused at first, but then the reality hit him. He froze, eyes widening just slightly. He knew exactly where this conversation was heading. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to throw accusations around. No, this was going to be much more impactful. I had to make him realize just how deeply he had betrayed me and how much his actions had hurt. I took a deep breath and walked toward him, my gaze unwavering. "I know about Helen," I said calmly, watching as his face drained of color. The silence between us stretched out, heavy and suffocating. David stood there, frozen for a moment, as if the words I had just spoken hadn't quite registered in his mind. He blinked rapidly, his mouth opening and closing as if he were trying to find the right words, but nothing came. I didn't rush him, though. I wanted him to feel the weight of his guilt. I wanted him to fully understand that his secret was no longer hidden. Finally, he managed to speak, but his voice was shaky, like he wasn't sure whether to defend himself or apologize. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, taking a step toward me, his face contorting into a mask of confusion. "Helen, that's not what you think. It's just a business thing, I swear." I almost laughed, but it wasn't funny. It was sad. After everything, this was his defense? He'd been so careful, so meticulous in hiding his actions from me, and now he thought he could brush it off with an excuse as weak as that? I crossed my arms, standing my ground. A business thing? Really? I raised an eyebrow, letting the sarcasm drip from my words. A business thing where you plan a romantic dinner and tell her you can't wait to see her? And don't forget that red dress. How could I possibly misunderstand that? David's face flushed a deep shade of red. His eyes darted away, unable to meet mine. He was panicking, trying to figure out a way to save himself. His hand tugged nervously at his tie, his movements becoming frantic as he searched for the words that might make this all go away. But there were no words. There was nothing he could say to make this right. You weren't supposed to find out," he muttered, his voice low, almost ashamed. "I wanted to make this anniversary special, but I just wanted something for myself. Something different." The admission hit me like a slap across the face. He wasn't even sorry. He wasn't apologizing for betraying me or for the hurt he had caused. No, he was justifying it. He was admitting that he had wanted something different, something I wasn't enough to provide anymore. The realization that he had stopped seeing me as his partner, that he had been living a lie all this time, twisted something deep inside me. "You know," I said, my voice surprisingly calm despite the storm swirling inside me, "I thought this anniversary would be different. I thought you were planning something special, something that would remind me of all the years we've spent together. But instead, I find out you've been planning a night for someone else. Someone you think is more exciting than me." I shook my head, the bitterness creeping into my words. "How long has this been going on, David? How long have you been hiding this from me?" He didn't answer right away. I watched as his face contorted with guilt, with confusion, and maybe even a hint of fear. Finally, he muttered, "It's not like that. It's just a mistake. I never meant for it to go this far." I smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was cold. "A mistake, David? A mistake is spilling coffee on the carpet. A mistake is forgetting to take out the trash. But this," I gestured to the situation, my voice rising slightly now, "this is a betrayal, and you don't get to call it a mistake." David looked like he was about to speak, but I cut him off. "No, I'm done listening to your excuses. I've been married to you for over 30 years, and all I ever wanted was for us to be happy, for us to be partners. But you've been living in your own little world, completely disregarding how I feel. And now you think you can just waltz in here and explain it all away? I don't think so." The words were out, and I could feel the weight of them hanging in the air. This wasn't a conversation anymore, it was a reckoning. He had pushed me to this point, and now he would face the consequences of thinking he could betray me and get away with it. David's face paled as my words sank in. His hands were trembling now, and for the first time in years, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. I wasn't the woman he thought he could control or manipulate anymore. I wasn't the same person who had let him slide by, who'd been content with whatever he gave me. Now everything had changed. I had changed. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said weakly, his voice barely above a whisper. He was reaching for me now, trying to close the distance, but I took a step back. I wasn't ready to be near him, not yet. I thought this would be just one thing, something I could do for myself. "I never meant for you to find out like this. That's the problem, isn't it?" I said, the bitterness in my voice almost like acid. "You never meant for me to find out. You never thought about how I would feel. You just went ahead with your little secret life, assuming I wouldn't notice or care." I shook my head. "You took me for granted, David." His eyes flickered with guilt, but it wasn't enough. "I never took you for granted," he argued, but there was no conviction in his voice. It was the kind of defense that sounded rehearsed, like something he thought he could say to make the situation go away. I crossed my arms, glaring at him. "Oh, but you did. You always have. All these years, I've been the one carrying us. I've been the one who gave up my career, my passions, my time for this family. I supported you when you needed it. I stood by you through every little failure, every setback. But what did you do? You didn't think I deserved the same, did you? You didn't think I deserved a partner who respected me." David's face twisted with frustration. "This is just so messed up. I didn't expect you to react like this. You're blowing this out of proportion." "Blowing it out of proportion?" I said, my voice rising. "You've been planning a secret dinner with another woman on our anniversary, David. You think I'm supposed to just let that slide, to pretend like it's nothing? Number. This isn't blowing it out of proportion. This is me realizing that I deserve more than what you've been giving me." His face crumpled with the weight of my words, and for a second I thought he was going to break down in front of me. But I wasn't moved by his tears or his apologies anymore. I had heard them all before, and they never amounted to anything. It was always the same cycle. A few tearful apologies, a couple of promises, and then he'd go back to his old ways. "No more," I said firmly, cutting him off before he could continue. "I'm done with your lies, done with your excuses. I'm tired, David. I've been tired for a long time." David stood there, stunned. I could see the wheels turning in his head, trying to figure out what he could say or do to fix this. But there was nothing he could do anymore. The truth had come out, and it had changed everything. I had no intention of forgiving him easily, and I had no interest in being his backup plan when his other life failed. "I'm not going to be the woman you think you can walk all over anymore," I added, my voice steady but filled with finality. "I'm not going to wait around for you to realize what you've done to me. You'll have to face the consequences of your actions now." David's face fell, his shoulders slumping in defeat. For a moment he seemed lost, unsure of what to do next. The man who had once been so confident, the one who thought he could get away with anything, was now standing in front of me as a shadow of the person I once admired. And it didn't make me feel victorious. It made me feel tired. So tired of carrying the weight of this relationship on my own shoulders for so long. I stared at him for a long moment before speaking again. "You thought you could surprise me with something else, but now it's my turn to surprise you. You've been planning your little escape for months. Well, now it's my turn to show you what happens when someone gets fed up." David opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, he just looked at me, defeated, knowing deep down that this wasn't going to be easy for him. Not anymore. I could see the panic beginning to rise in David's eyes. He knew that this conversation wasn't like the others. This wasn't just another argument that would blow over in a day or two. I wasn't asking for an apology anymore, and I wasn't interested in hearing his excuses. No, I was beyond that now. I had reached a point where I needed him to understand something. This was my life too, and I wasn't going to let him dictate it any longer. For a moment, we stood there in silence, the tension thick between us. David shuffled his feet awkwardly, not sure how to proceed. He had never been good at taking responsibility. It was always someone else's fault, his boss, the kids, the stress of work. But now, it was all on him. This time, there was no one else to blame, no distractions to hide behind. "I don't know what you want me to say," he muttered, his voice now sounding small, defeated. "I've already told you it was a mistake. I didn't mean to hurt you." But I wasn't hearing it anymore. "You didn't mean to hurt me?" I repeated, disbelief in my voice. "David, you've been planning this behind my back for weeks, and you didn't think it would hurt me? You think I'm stupid enough to believe you didn't mean for this to happen? It's too late for apologies. You've already crossed the line." His shoulders sagged further as he rubbed his face, clearly exhausted. He wasn't used to being confronted like this, and I could see that it was eating away at him. For the first time in years, I saw vulnerability instead of arrogance. But that didn't soften my resolve. I wasn't the same woman who would just forgive him for everything. "You think you can do whatever you want, don't you?" I continued, my words cutting through the air. "You've convinced yourself that I'll always be here, waiting, ready to forgive you. You think you can get away with anything as long as you throw a few I'm sorries my way. And well, let me tell you something, David. I'm done being that person." I took a deep breath, the anger bubbling up inside of me once again. For too long, I've put your needs ahead of mine. I've been your support, your confidant, your caretaker. I've given you everything, my time, my love, my patience. And you repay me by sneaking around with someone else. You're not the man I thought you were. David opened his mouth, probably to apologize again, but I held up a hand to stop him. "Don't even try it. Don't apologize for something you don't understand." I paused for a moment, gathering my thoughts. I've been thinking about this for a while now, and I've realized something. This marriage, this life we've built together, it's not enough for you anymore. You've checked out, David, and I can't keep pretending that everything is okay when you've been so careless with me. He looked at me, his face a mix of guilt and desperation. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What I'm saying is that I'm done," I said firmly. "I can't keep living like this, pretending everything is fine when it's not. I don't want to be the second choice. I don't want to be the woman you come back to when everything else falls apart. I deserve better than that." David's face shifted between confusion and fear. He wasn't ready for this. He thought he could get away with his actions without facing the consequences, but I was done being the woman who accepted crumbs. I wasn't asking for a grand gesture anymore. I was asking for respect, and if he couldn't give me that, then I had to walk away. The silence between us stretched on, and for a moment I thought maybe he was going to make a real change, but deep down I knew better. His actions had already shown me everything I needed to know about who he truly was. This wasn't going to be easy, but I had made up my mind. If I was going to heal, I had to let go. "I'm leaving," I finally said, the words heavier than I expected. "I need space. I need to figure out what's next for me. And that doesn't include you." His face fell, and I could see the panic beginning to rise in his chest. He took a step forward, his hand outstretched as though reaching for me. "Wait, please," he said, his voice cracking. "Don't go. I'll fix this. I swear I will. Just don't leave." But it was too late for that. I wasn't going to be a part of his world anymore, his world of lies and deception. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving him standing there, staring after me with a mix of regret and disbelief. As I reached the door, I paused, looking back at him one last time. "You'll never understand what you've lost," I said softly, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. But that's not my problem anymore. And with that, I walked out of the house, leaving David behind, knowing that this time there was no turning back. I stepped out into the cool night air, the weight of my decision settling in. The streetlights illuminated the path ahead of me, but it felt like I was stepping into the unknown. For so long, I had been the one holding everything together, the glue that kept our lives from falling apart. And now, as I walked away, I realized how much I had lost sight of myself in the process. I had given so much to David, to our marriage, that I had forgotten to take care of me. But now, as I walked away from the house, it felt like I was finally doing something for myself. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me out of my thoughts. I checked it, and it was a text from David. His words were hurried, almost frantic. "I'm sorry, I know I messed up. Please don't leave. Let's talk. Please, I'll fix it." I stared at the screen for a few moments, feeling a mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to go back, to hear him out, to try and make things right. But another part of me, one that had been silenced for far too long, knew this wasn't the solution. His words were empty, like they always had been. I couldn't keep falling for the same broken promises. I put my phone on silent and slipped it back into my bag. There was no turning back now. I wasn't going to let him make me feel guilty for walking away from a marriage that had already betrayed me. I had to keep moving forward, even if it was hard, even if I was scared. This was about me now. I walked for what felt like hours, letting my thoughts run wild. Part of me still couldn't believe what had just happened. Couldn't believe that after all these years, after all the sacrifices I had made, David had taken me for granted like this. He had assumed that I would always be there, no matter what. And for the longest time, I had let him think that. But not anymore. I had my own life to live. I had my own dreams that had been put on hold for too long. Eventually, I found myself standing in front of my best friend Claire's house. She had always been my safe place, the person who understood me more than anyone else. I needed to talk to her, needed to share what had just happened. I rang the doorbell, my heart still racing. Claire opened the door almost immediately, her face lighting up when she saw me. But when she saw the look on my face, the excitement faded, replaced by concern. "What happened?" she asked, her voice soft but knowing. She must have seen the tension in my eyes. Without a word, I stepped inside, and she led me to the couch. I sat down, taking a deep breath. Claire didn't rush me to speak. She simply sat next to me, waiting for me to say what was on my mind. "He did it," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "David, he's been planning something with another woman. He lied to me. He promised me a surprise for our anniversary, but it was all a lie. He's been seeing someone else, and I found out just before everything was supposed to happen." Claire's eyes widened, but she didn't interrupt. She just listened as I continued, telling her everything about the texts, the dinner reservation, and the moment when I finally confronted David. When I finished, I looked up at her, feeling a sense of vulnerability I hadn't felt in years. "I don't know what to do, Claire," I admitted, my voice shaking slightly. "I don't know if I can forgive him this time." She placed a hand on mine, offering silent support. "You don't have to forgive him if you're not ready, and you don't have to stay with him just because you've been together for so long. You deserve more than someone who doesn't respect you." I nodded, grateful for her words. It felt like a weight had been lifted, like I was finally starting to see things clearly. For so long, I had stayed because I thought I had to. I thought that marriage meant enduring, no matter how painful it became. But Claire was right. I didn't have to stay. I didn't have to endure this any longer. "Thank you," I whispered, squeezing her hand. "I think I need to start living for myself now." Claire gave me a warm, reassuring smile. "You will, Margaret. You're strong, and you'll figure this out. Just remember, you're not alone in this." As the night wore on, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't burdened by guilt or worry. I wasn't caught up in trying to fix something that was broken beyond repair. I was free. free to finally be myself, to live the life I deserved, and to take control of my own happiness. When I finally left Claire's house that night, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going back to David. I was done being the person who lived in someone else's shadow. It was time for me to shine. The days that followed were a blur of emotions: anger, sadness, relief. I spent the first few nights alone, not quite ready to return to my house, to the life I had left behind. I stayed in a small hotel nearby just for a change of scenery to give myself space to think. The weight of leaving David behind lingered like a cloud, but the more I sat with it, the clearer things became. I wasn't just walking away from a marriage that had grown stale and hurtful. I was walking towards something new, something that would finally allow me to put myself first. I spent hours each day reflecting on what had happened. I kept replaying the confrontation in my mind, wondering if I could have handled it differently. But deep down, I knew it had to happen that way. There was no other option. David had become a stranger to me, someone I no longer recognized. The man I had married, the man I had built a life with, had let me down in ways that were unforgivable. I had been his partner, his support, but all he saw me as was an easy target for his selfish desires. I made the decision to visit the house, to retrieve my things, and to finally sever ties for good. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew I had to do it. I couldn't keep running away from the life I had built. As I drove toward the house, my heart raced. I had no idea how David would react when he saw me. Would he beg me to come back? Would he try to apologize again, pretending as if everything could go back to the way it was? But when I arrived, the house felt different. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a place where I had given up too much of myself. David wasn't there. He had left for work, leaving the house empty just as I had left it. I took a deep breath and walked inside. The familiar sights, the memories, all came flooding back. The kitchen where we'd shared countless meals, the living room where we'd spent lazy Sundays, the bedroom where I had dreamed of a future that now seemed like a lifetime ago. It all felt distant now. I started packing my things, slowly, methodically, not because I wanted to hold on to anything, but because I needed to leave with some semblance of dignity. As I moved through the house collecting my belongings, I couldn't help but think of all the years I had spent trying to make David happy. I had given so much of myself, sacrificed so many of my dreams to support him, to build a life together. But all of that had been overshadowed by his lies and selfishness. I wasn't just taking my things out of the house, I was taking back my life. By the time I finished packing, I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. But I also felt something else, something I hadn't felt in years. It was a sense of liberation. I was free from the expectations, the guilt, and the constant weight of carrying a relationship that had never been balanced. As I walked out the door for the last time, I couldn't help but feel a bittersweet sense of closure. There would be no more late-night arguments, no more pretending that everything was okay. I wasn't running away from my past. I was walking toward my future, a future where I would no longer have to hide behind David's mistakes or constantly second-guess my worth. I got into my car and drove away from the house, not looking back. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of where I was going. I didn't know what the next chapter would bring, but I knew one thing for sure. I was done being the person who came last. It was time for me to live for myself. The first few days of freedom were a strange mix of emotions. I felt a weight lifted from my shoulders, but at the same time, there was an emptiness that I hadn't anticipated. I wasn't sure what to do with myself anymore. For so long, I had defined my life through David, through our relationship, through the sacrifices I had made for him. And now, with that chapter closed, I felt a bit lost, like a woman without an identity of her own. I spent those days in a small apartment I had rented, not far from where we had lived. It was modest but cozy, and every little corner was a reminder of the new life I was beginning to carve out for myself. I spent the first few days unpacking, organizing and slowly settling in. It felt like a fresh start, but the echoes of my old life still lingered. David's face, his words, his lies, they were hard to shake off, but I knew I had to keep moving forward. It wasn't long before I began to rediscover parts of myself I had buried for years. I started spending more time doing things I loved, but had put on hold for far too long. I revisited old hobbies, things I had enjoyed before I'd gotten caught up in the whirlwind of marriage and family. I took up painting again, something I had always been passionate about but had set aside when life got busy. I would spend hours in the mornings, my paintbrush gliding over the canvas, lost in my own world. The colors and textures began to fill the emptiness I had felt since leaving David. It was like each stroke was a small act of healing. One afternoon, as I stood back and admired my latest painting, a landscape of a sunlit beach with soft waves crashing on the shore, I realized how much I had neglected my own happiness. For so long, I had put everyone else's needs above my own, assuming that was what being a wife, a mother, a partner meant. But now I was learning that I could still be all those things, without losing myself in the process. The phone calls from David started soon after. At first, it was 1 or 2 a day, then it became more persistent. Each message was filled with apologies, regret, and promises to change. "I love you," he would say. "I never meant to hurt you. Please, let's talk." I could hear the desperation in his voice, but it did nothing to sway me. His apologies were just words, words that came too late. I had already made my decision, and I wasn't going to let him manipulate me into going back. Each time I saw his name flash on my phone, I felt a strange mix of anger and pity. How could he think I would fall for his empty words again? Did he really believe I would forgive him, just like that? I had given him so many chances over the years, and each time he had taken me for granted. He had broken my trust, and trust was not something I could easily rebuild. The only thing he was doing now was trying to reinsert himself into my life, to take back control. But I wasn't going to let him. One evening, I finally had enough. I couldn't stand the constant messages, the constant reminders of everything that had gone wrong. I picked up the phone, my fingers shaking slightly as I pressed the button to end the call. I had heard enough. This time, I wasn't going to let his pleas for forgiveness make me feel guilty for standing up for myself. Instead of responding, I blocked his number. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one. I couldn't keep living in the past. It was time for me to take full control of my future, and that meant cutting out the toxic influences from my life. I didn't need his approval anymore. I didn't need his promises. I needed to rebuild my life on my own terms. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't looking over my shoulder anymore, worrying about what David was going to say or do next. I wasn't looking for validation from anyone. I had found peace in my own company, and for the first time in so long, I felt like I was finally living for myself. And it felt good. It felt like freedom. Days turned into weeks, and the weight I had carried for so long began to feel lighter. My routine slowly became mine again, without the interruptions, without the expectations. I took long walks in the mornings, letting the fresh air clear my mind, reminding myself that the life I was creating was not just about escaping my past, but about building something new. Each step was a step away from the woman I had been, and a step toward the woman I wanted to become. The most surprising thing was how much I started to enjoy the quiet. I had spent so many years drowning out my own voice, living for others, that the silence at first had been unsettling. But soon, I realized how much peace it brought me. I didn't have to fill every moment with noise or distraction. I could just be. And for the first time in so long, I could hear my own thoughts without the interference of anyone else's expectations. One afternoon, as I sat by my window, watching the world outside, a small smile crept across my face. I had finally come to terms with what had happened. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I doubted myself, when the loneliness crept in and made me question my choices. But every time I thought about going back, about giving David another chance, I reminded myself of what I had walked away from, the lies, the betrayal, the years of feeling invisible. I didn't deserve that. No one did. Then one day, as I was painting in my new studio, a small light-filled room I had set up in the corner of the apartment, I received a package. It was unexpected, a simple brown box with no return address. I set down my paintbrush and opened it, curiosity bubbling up inside me. Inside the box, wrapped carefully in soft tissue paper, was a small journal. It was nothing fancy, just a simple leather-bound notebook with the words, "For New Beginnings," engraved on the front. I couldn't help but wonder who had sent it. There was no note, no explanation, just the journal. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the texture of the leather. It felt like a sign, like the universe was giving me permission to start something new, to document the next chapter of my life. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to rush. I could take my time, build my new story at my own pace, without anyone else trying to control the narrative. I placed the journal on my desk, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. This was it, the beginning of something completely new. I wasn't defined by my past. I wasn't defined by David or anyone else. I was defined by my choices, by my strength, and by the woman I was becoming. As I sat there looking at the journal, I realized something important. I didn't need to have everything figured out right now. I didn't need to know exactly what the future held. All I needed to do was keep moving forward, one step at a time. And with that, I picked up the journal, opened the first page, and began to write. I wrote about my journey, about the pain I had gone through, about the strength I had found in myself. And when I finished, I smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning. My story wasn't over. It was only just beginning. I had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited to find out. The weeks that followed were filled with new discoveries. I had no roadmap to guide me, but I found myself embracing the uncertainty. There was something freeing about living without a plan, without the constant pressure to please someone else. For so long, I had been caught in the rhythm of David's world, always adjusting, always compromising. Now, it was just me, finally making decisions that were purely for myself. I started to reconnect with friends I had lost touch with over the years. Some had been distant, others unsure of how to approach me after my split with David. But as I reached out, I was surprised by how welcoming they were. It felt good to laugh again, to share stories and memories that had nothing to do with my marriage. I hadn't realized how much I had missed that connection, how much I had neglected those friendships in favor of trying to keep my family intact. One of my oldest friends, Marie, invited me to a weekend getaway. It was an opportunity to get away from the city and reconnect with nature. I hesitated at first, unsure if I was ready to leave my newly found comfort zone, but something inside me urged me to take the leap. I packed my bags, left the quiet apartment behind, and headed into the countryside. The weekend was exactly what I needed. The fresh air, the wide open spaces, the calm that surrounded me. It was a reset I didn't know I needed. We spent our days hiking through the hills, talking late into the night about everything we had missed. I shared my story with Marie, and though she was sympathetic, she never once made me feel like I had failed. There was no judgment, only understanding. It was during this trip that I realized something that had eluded me for so long. I was healing. I hadn't thought about David or the betrayal for days. My mind, once consumed with anger and self-doubt, was finally starting to find peace. The layers of hurt and disappointment were slowly peeling away, and in their place, I was beginning to feel a sense of empowerment. I was still figuring out who I was without David, but I could feel the foundation beneath me becoming stronger with each passing day. Marie and I spent a quiet evening by the lake, the water reflecting the soft glow of the moon. We sat in silence, both content in the stillness. It was then that I made a promise to myself. I wasn't just moving on from my marriage. I was creating a life I could be proud of, a life that was entirely my own. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what that might look like. The time away in the countryside was just the beginning. When I returned to my apartment, I was filled with a new sense of purpose. I had decided that I would no longer let my past define me. I wasn't a victim of my circumstances. I was a survivor. I had come through the hardest part, and now it was time to embrace the next chapter with open arms. I threw myself into my art more than ever. Painting had always been an escape for me, but now it was more than just a hobby. It was a form of therapy. The more I painted, the more I felt my mind clearing. Each brushstroke was a release, a way to shed the last remnants of my past. My paintings became more vibrant, more alive, and so did I. But it wasn't just my art that was changing. I began to take better care of myself, both physically and mentally. I started working out regularly, something I had neglected for years. I found a yoga studio close to my apartment and began attending classes. I wasn't just getting fit. I was reclaiming my body, taking ownership of it again. For so long, I had put my own needs last. But now, I was putting myself first. And it felt incredible. One day, while I was out for a walk, I bumped into someone I hadn't seen in years. Sarah, an old colleague from when I used to work in marketing. We'd always gotten along well, but life had pulled us in different directions. We exchanged numbers and promised to catch up soon. A few days later, we met for coffee, and I was pleasantly surprised by how easy it was to talk to her. We had so much in common, and I realized how much I had missed having meaningful connections with other people. As Sarah and I continued to meet up regularly, I began to notice something else, a spark, a glimmer of possibility. As we talked more about our lives and the challenges we had faced, it became clear that we were both in similar places in our journeys. Sarah had recently gone through a tough breakup herself and was learning to rediscover her passions and her own worth. There was no rush, no pressure, but it was nice to feel a connection again, to realize that there was more to life than just moving on from the past. Perhaps somewhere down the road, there was even room for love again. But for now, I was content with the simple joy of rediscovering who I was. As the weeks passed, I felt the future unfold before me with a new sense of excitement. I wasn't defined by my past mistakes or the years I had spent in a marriage that ultimately wasn't meant to be. I had the power to create a life full of purpose, joy, and connection. And the best part? It was entirely mine to build. I wasn't running away from my past anymore. I was stepping into my future, one that was filled with endless possibilities. And with every new step, I realized that the woman I had been before was just the beginning. The woman I was becoming? She was strong, independent, and ready to embrace whatever came next. As the months went by, I continued to thrive in the life I was slowly but surely building for myself. I found a new rhythm, one that was free from the confines of my past. I had my art, my growing friendships, and the newfound confidence that came from knowing I was strong enough to handle whatever life threw my way. It was amazing how much my perspective had shifted in such a short time. The woman I had been, quiet, reserved, constantly worried about pleasing everyone else, seemed like a distant memory. I began to meet new people as well, expanding my circle beyond just friends from the past. One of the most surprising things I realized was how much I had been holding myself back before. I had lived in a bubble for years, convincing myself that my life was about keeping the peace, about staying in the background, about doing what was expected of me. But now, I was starting to explore who I really was, and it felt like I was seeing the world through new eyes. The best part? I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. One evening, after a long day of painting and running errands, I found myself walking into a local bookstore I had always loved. The smell of paper and ink was comforting, familiar, and it reminded me of my love for literature, something I hadn't had time for in years. As I wandered through the aisles, I stopped at the poetry section, drawn to a book that had always intrigued me. I picked it up, ran my fingers over the cover, and began flipping through the pages. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace, as if the universe had guided me to this moment. I found a quiet corner, sank into a chair, and began reading. The words spoke to me in a way that was almost surreal. It was like the poems were speaking directly to my soul, offering comfort, wisdom, and a reminder that I was not alone in this journey. I'd forgotten how much I needed things like this in my life, things that nourished my spirit and reminded me of my own worth. Later that evening, I decided to buy the book. As I walked out of the store, the weight of my past didn't seem so heavy anymore. I realized that, just like the poetry I had just discovered, life was a collection of moments, some beautiful, some painful. But all of them together were what made up my story, and I was finally ready to start writing the next chapter. The healing process wasn't quick, but with each passing day, I grew more comfortable in my own skin. I had learned to appreciate the small things, the quiet mornings, the peaceful evenings, and the joy of doing something simply because it made me happy. I had reclaimed my identity, my space, and most importantly, my sense of self-worth. I wasn't the woman who had once allowed herself to be a shadow of someone else. I was strong, independent, and above all, I was whole. But there were still moments when the past crept in, when doubts would surface, and when I would find myself questioning if I had made the right decision. Did I really need to walk away from David? Was there a chance that we could have worked things out? These thoughts came in waves, and while they didn't consume me like they once had, they still lingered. One particular evening, as I sat by the window, I found myself reflecting on the years I had spent with him, the good times, the love, the family we had built. It was hard not to feel some regret, some sense of loss for what could have been. But then I reminded myself of the truth. I had given my all to that relationship, and I had sacrificed too much of myself. It was time to honor who I had become and embrace the future I was creating. As the months went on, I found that the weight of the past began to feel lighter. David's calls became less frequent, and eventually I stopped hearing from him altogether. I had come to realize that he wasn't the man I had married anymore, and our story, as painful as it was over. But the journey I had taken in leaving him had led me to a deeper understanding of myself. It had given me the strength to stand on my own, and it had opened the door to a life full of new possibilities. With this newfound clarity, I decided to take another step, one that felt both exciting and terrifying. I began thinking about the future. What did I want from the next chapter of my life? Did I want to dive back into the career I had left behind years ago? Did I want to travel, to explore the world? The possibilities seemed endless, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the thrill of uncertainty, the excitement of knowing that whatever I decided, it would be my choice. My life was no longer in the hands of anyone else. It was mine. That was when I made the decision to start a new project, something that had been brewing in the back of my mind for a while. I would open a small gallery space for my artwork. I had always loved creating, but the idea of sharing my passion with others felt like a new adventure, one that would help me continue growing and evolving. I wasn't sure how it would all come together, but I was ready to give it a try. I wasn't looking for validation anymore. I was doing this for me, and with that, I realized that I wasn't just moving on. I was moving forward, building a life that was entirely mine. The future was wide open, and for the first time in a long time, I felt excited to see where it would take me. The gallery idea started small, but quickly began to take shape. I spent weeks researching, finding the perfect space, and figuring out how to turn my passion into something tangible. I was both excited and nervous. There were so many unknowns, but for the first time in years, the uncertainty felt more like an adventure than a burden. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It wasn't about what David would think or whether he would approve. It was about creating something that was truly mine, a reflection of who I was now, not who I had been. I rented a small, cozy storefront in a quiet part of the city, one that had just enough foot traffic to feel alive without being overwhelming. The walls were white, bare, and waiting for something to bring them to life. Over the next few months, I poured my heart into it. I spent countless hours painting new pieces, making sure they reflected the journey I had gone through, colors that spoke of pain, healing, and strength. There was a rawness to my work that I hadn't tapped into before, and it felt liberating to let those emotions flow freely onto the canvas. The opening day came faster than I had anticipated. I stood outside the gallery, taking in the sight of the sign with my name on it. I was filled with a mix of pride and disbelief. I had done it. I had taken that leap, and now here I was, about to share my story with the world in a way I had never imagined. The first few visitors were people from the neighborhood, curious passers-by who stopped in out of interest. Some stayed, some left quickly, but each person who walked through the door felt like a small victory. As the evening wore on, more people arrived, drawn in by the atmosphere I had created, calm, warm, and inviting. I could feel the energy in the room shift, the buzz of excitement slowly building. Then, just as I was starting to feel more at ease, a familiar face appeared in the doorway. It was Marie, my friend from the weekend getaway. She had come to show her support as she promised she would, but she wasn't the only one. Behind her was someone I hadn't expected to see, Sarah, the woman I had reconnected with over coffee a few months ago. She had mentioned she would be dropping by, but seeing her standing there now felt surreal. She looked so different from the woman I had once known. She had an air of confidence about her that wasn't there before. She had blossomed, too, in her own way. The two of them walked over to me, and I was filled with gratitude. Marie gave me a warm hug, and Sarah followed with a soft smile. "This is amazing, Margaret," Sarah said, her voice full of genuine admiration. "Your work is beautiful. It's so raw, so powerful." I felt a rush of emotion as I looked at them, realizing just how far I had come. It wasn't just about the gallery. It wasn't even just about the paintings. It was about everything that had led me here. The strength I had found in myself, the friends who had supported me, and the realization that I wasn't alone. I smiled, my heart swelling with a quiet pride. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't have done this without the support of friends like you." As the night unfolded, the gallery filled with people. Some came to admire the art, others came to support me. But no matter why they were there, they were all part of this new chapter in my life. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. I wasn't living in the shadow of my past. I wasn't tied to someone else's expectations. I was finally, truly living for myself. By the end of the evening, as I stood alone in the quiet gallery, the soft hum of the city outside filling the air, I realized that this was just the beginning. I had spent years doubting myself, letting others dictate my path, but now I was in control. I had created something that was mine, something beautiful, something real. And with that thought, I knew I was exactly where I needed to be, right here, in this moment, on my own terms. There was still so much to do, so much to discover, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid. The future felt full of possibility, and I was ready to embrace it all. The following weeks were a whirlwind. The gallery was a success beyond anything I could have imagined. I had never expected it to become such a hub for creativity, but slowly, word of mouth spread. People came in, admired my work, and most importantly, they connected with it. It felt surreal to watch strangers stand in front of my paintings, their eyes filled with emotion. My art was telling my story, but it was also speaking to others in ways I never thought possible. As the gallery grew, so did I. I started collaborating with other local artists, attending workshops, and even teaching a few classes myself. The woman who had once felt small, invisible, was now standing confidently in the world, sharing her story through her art and connecting with others who had walked similar paths. I had found my voice, my passion, and I wasn't afraid to let it shine any more. But it wasn't just the gallery that had transformed me. My relationships with the people in my life deepened. Marie, Sarah, and I spent more time together, talking about everything from art to life to the ups and downs of our personal journeys. I had found my tribe, people who understood me, accepted me, and supported me. It was more than I could have hoped for. One evening, as I was locking up the gallery after a long day, I stopped to take a deep breath and look around one last time. The walls were filled with color, each painting telling a story of its own. I could feel the warmth in the space, the energy that had taken root in this place I had built. I had created something beautiful, something real, and it was mine. For the first time in so long, I felt at peace. I wasn't living for anyone else anymore. I wasn't trying to meet someone's expectations or sacrifice my happiness for someone else's comfort. I had finally learned how to live for myself. I walked out of the gallery, locking the door behind me, and took a moment to look up at the stars. The night was quiet, the world around me still, but I felt alive. I wasn't perfect, and there were still challenges ahead, but I had learned to trust myself, to embrace my own strength, and to walk forward with confidence. The past no longer defined me, and I had finally let go of the fear that had once held me back. With each new day, I continued to grow, and I knew that the journey ahead would be full of surprises. I wasn't sure where life would take me, but for the first time in years, I felt ready for whatever came next. The only thing I was certain of was that I was in control of my own future. And with that knowledge, I walked into the unknown with my head held high, excited for all the possibilities waiting just around the corner. This was my life, and it was mine to live.